Holly, you want to turn off your picture, your camera?
Will do.
As I will. Because we've got people here. We're ready to go. If you are, everyone is.
Yep.
Okay, get everyone back. I think we just. Okay. I don't see Toni or Silas at the moment. Do you, Peter? Are they're there?
Yeah, I see everyone.
I do too.
I'm probably the problem. Okay, if we're all here, I'll begin, and because you three are the reason we're here, especially Toni. To everyone who's joining us from wherever you may be, we at the Elliott Bay Book Company, which is on Duwamish land in the city of Seattle, in the northwestern part of the United States, are delighted you are here. We with us, and this is the West Coast, even though you're going to hear more about New York City as the evening goes along. But we have author Toni Bentley here to discuss her newly published extraordinary book, Serenade. Balanchine Story is the subtitle. A book that she has written. She in a career that has included both dance with the New York City Ballet, but also for many years since become quite an extraordinary writer. She's published 5 which have gotten major attention, sales, reviews. These include a couple books about dance, Winter Season, A Dancer's Journal, Holding On to the Air, which was co-authored with Suzanne Farrell. She also wrote the memoir, The Surrender, and has done other books about music and written also widely for publications all over the place, the New Yorker, New York Times, you pretty much name it. She, in this book, has written a book about probably the most, what many would call the signature ballet of George Balanchine, and you're going to hear from others who can attest to what George Balanchine has done, along with Toni, in the persons of Peter Boal, and Silas Farley, who's joining us from Los Angeles, which is also down where Toni is. Toni will read from and talk about this book with Peter, and all three, Peter, Silas, as well as Toni, have danced with New York City Ballet. Peter and Silas were educated at the School of American Ballet, which is the school that works directly into New York City Ballet. Peter taught at the School of American Ballet. Peter, of course, I'm talking about him here in Seattle. He's the longtime artistic director of Pacific Northwest Ballet and the director of the Pacific Northwest Ballet School. He danced in the company for over 20 years and a couple Balanchine pieces, and has also had his own ensemble, Peter Boal and Company. Silas Farley has had a little less time to do all these things. You'll see, I think he's comes along a little later in the story, but he himself was schooled at the School of American Ballet and then danced with New York City Ballet from 2012 to 2020. And he is now the dean of the Trudy Zipper Dance Institute and the Amplify artist at Colburn School. And we, in our visiting beforehand, didn't talk about his work in choreographing one of our favorite poets, Ilya Kaminsky's The Piece, Deaf Republic, which I would love to see. So that you will hear, Silas is going to moderate what happens. So I think you'll hear Peter and everyone has things to say, I think, about this dance Serenade of George Balanchine. That Toni has written in this book, which is beautifully written. That's the other thing we were talking about. Her editor is the poetry editor. Toni's work as a writer really is worth noting and praising. And we hope you will be part of this as well by putting questions in the Q&A portal. And Silas will work those into the conversation as this goes along. Holly, my colleague here at Elliott Bay, is putting information on the book in the chat, as well as I think Tony's other books. And we can say at some point we'll have information put out by Peter Boal that's in the works. That won't be out probably until next year, but where Peter is such a treasure, and as well as Pacific Northwest Ballet and here in Seattle, so had to say that. Again, for everyone here, we thank you for being with us. And I think at this point, I will now disappear. Colleague Holly will come out at the very end. Attention and your bowl.
Well, Rick, thank you so much for welcoming us all here tonight. It's a pleasure to get to visit with you all and to celebrate Toni and her extraordinary book about Balanchine and about his great masterpiece, Serenade. And Toni, Peter, and I represent nearly 50 years of history with New York City Ballet and with Balanchine and with the legacy of both his choreography and his teaching. And so it's a real pleasure and privilege for the three of us to have a conversation and invite you all into that and explore and celebrate more about Mr. Balanchine and this extraordinary ballet. And Toni, I thought it would be fun. I don't know who all our audience is in this webinar format, but if you were, at a coffee shop and somebody looked at the cover of your book and they said a Balanchine Serenade, a Balanchine Story, and they asked you, who is George Balanchine? How would you answer that? And why is he important?
Thank you. I just want to say I'm so delighted to be here, hosted by this marvelous bookstore, and to be with my colleagues and friends, Peter and Silas. Thank you. Yes, that's a very good question, because George Balanchine died just over 39 years ago. So it is understandable, though not to some of us, that some people don't even know who he is now. But we are here to educate. George Balanchine, everything I'm going to say here is my own opinion, but I think it's backed up by many others, including probably Silas and Peter. George Balanchine is the greatest innovator in the history of classical dance. Now, one could add Marius Petipa there, but if you're really streamlining the history, George Balanchine was born in Russia. He came out after the Bolshevik Revolution. He was born in 1904. He died in 1983. And the history of classic ballet, very briefly, began in the court of Louis XIV, to put Balanchine in context. This is why all the terms are French. And it kind of, the center of ballet went from being French to picking up some Italian along the way with Marie Taglioni. And then it centered, as many people think now, that ballet is in fact Russian. It is not, it was originally French, but it became a great center because of all the money poured into it by the czars before the Bolshevik Revolution. And that is the world that Balanchine was born into in 1904 and grew up in, and in great luxury. The school he was at is the school that produced Rudolf Nureyev, Mikhail Baryshnikov, Tamara Karsavina, Anna Pavlova. Some of the very, very greatest of all dancers of all time came from the same school Balanchine was at. He came out in 1924. He fled after the Bolshevik Revolution, began his career in the West, first in Europe with the great Serge Diaghilev. And then in 1933, he was brought to America by Lincoln Kirstein, a very great American who's brought a great many things to the arts in America. Most significantly, probably George Balanchine to America. And so from 1933 until his death in 1983, Balanchine made ballet American and brought the tradition of this aristocratic art that is very precise and very, very beautiful. And to me, it's the way classical music, one might say, is at the pinnacle of all music. It may not be your favorite. Everyone likes what they like. I like a lot of popular music myself, but classical ballet It requires, training for many, many, many years. It is the classic dance of all dance. And George Balanchine changed. We'll talk about that. He changed and innovated in the art probably more than any other single choreographer.
And with that flyover of this masterful artist, how did you first come into contact with this George Balanchine and his world?
Totally by chance. I was a little girl who did, once a week ballet school. My family moved to New York when I was 10, and my mother was looking for a ballet school. She had not, unlike many people at the time, had heard of Balanchine. We're talking the late 1960s. He was already very famous and sort of a living legend already by then. But my mother heard about it from another mother in the laundry room of our New York apartment building. She said, oh, the local ballet school is the School of American Ballet. So we trotted over there. I did an audition without realizing the entire life-changing world I was entering, literally entering. The school was in the Juilliard building at Lincoln Center at that time. And that began at the age of 10, my entering the world of Balanchine, which is a total world unto itself, much of which I write about in this book through the ballet Serenade. And so a few years later, as a young dancer in the Nutcracker, I first saw this magical man on stage because he used a lot of children in ballets. He loved children. And our tradition is such that you start dancing very young, at 8 or even earlier. And that by the age of 10, 11, 12, he had children dancing in the Nutcracker. And I think that's when Peter came along also.
That's right. And Peter, there's a major role for a little boy Prince in Balanchine's production of the Nutcracker. And Toni points out how Balanchine would always give special attention to that young man, and how through the history of Balanchine's Nutcracker, many of those boys from the School of American Ballet then became New York City ballet dancers. And you were one such prince. And what are your first memories of Balanchine?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I can't tell you how much I loved reading this book, because Toni and I overlapped for probably 5 years in the New York City Ballet.
Yeah.
But it's something about her descriptions just took me right back. And I didn't even realize that you had come to the School of American Ballet at such a young age and danced children's roles, which is so similar to what my entree was like into this world. But my parents were ballet fans. They lived 40 miles north of New York City, and they subscribed to New York City Ballet, and they subscribed on Thursday nights, which was kind of an amazing night because all the premieres happened on Thursday nights. So a new ballet by Jerome Robbins, a new ballet by Balanchine. And very soon my sister and I started joining. And so we would see Balanchine as the really elderly man who would come out after a world premiere of something that he had choreographed and take his bow. And there was conversation on the way home about the contributions of Balanchine and this sort of neoclassic aesthetic that was building and rising and growing from Balanchine and outward. And then the first time I saw him, probably like Toni, I was in a Nutcracker audition, and in he walked. And you're surprised at how small he is, but there's still an aura around him of importance and greatness and kind of reverence to even the students of the School of American Ballet. And there we were backstage before you knew it, working with him. It was an incredible experience for a child, but it's also sort of a brainwashing experience. Like you couldn't go back. You were so deeply in love with backstage, Balanchine, the dancers, the aesthetic. And I fell blissfully into the world, and I still haven't come out. So that's my story.
Yeah.
And Peter, from those stage rehearsals with Balanchine, do you have any moments or memories of anything he did or said?
You know the answer to this, Silas. You do run the Princess Pantomime, which is, it's a big solo in Act 2, and it's entrusted to, I think the first time I did it, I was 12. But you have to retell the whole story of Act 1, so it's quite specific, and it's pantomime, which doesn't necessarily come with ease or clarity to a young dancer. But in my rehearsals with Balanchine, all I ever got was good. And that's it. So I was glad it wasn't something like bad, but it was good. So on we went.
Well, it says so much because Balanchine was such a master of movement and not known to be one to use words to explain or describe really what he was articulating through the ballets that he was making or through the teaching that he was pouring out. And with that, Toni, Balanchine's whole work is a realm beyond words. So what first prompted you to write about your experience?
Well, I'm somewhat attracted in writing to writing about what is impossible. Because really writing about dance by definition is impossible. Dance is, of course, a three-dimensional, some say four-dimensional, live act in a moment. The curtain goes up, a ballet happens, the curtain comes down, and it's over. You've had all these many years of training to make those few moments on stage happen in an exquisite way and in service to the ballet. So using words to describe this is I regard it as it's impossible, so why don't I try? It's kind of a challenge. And also, I turned out to be a writer. You know, I trained, like both of you, to be a dancer and was a dancer in the Corps de Ballet for 10 years with Balanchine. But this ability to write came up when I was sort of mid-late teenager. And so it's just an urge in me to put things into words. It gives me, I don't know, it gives me, when it's going well, an enormous sense of satisfaction. One of the things that's always struck me is that it's so opposite to the liveness of dance, which I think as a young kind of existentially minded teenager, I became very concerned about my death when I was about 14, 15, 16. And the transience of dance, which is perhaps its most beautiful thing. It's got kind of this like transient sadness to it, which makes it so exquisite. Unlike all the other arts, when you think of architecture or poetry or prose, you know, writing, or painting, or even music, where there's a musical score that is very, very precise, ballet doesn't have that. You know, people have attempted things, but it only exists in a moment. And I think the act of writing gives me a sense of putting something of my experience and my love for this thing outside of myself. You know, it's over there, and in theory, it will be there when I'm dead. And I think I needed that because I couldn't, the transience moved me so much that I think it was one of my drives to start writing, was that everything was just passing by, and I wanted, you know, one might say I wanted to control it a little bit. You know, so I started writing about everything. And as you said, my first book was writing about my life dancing. And now, you know, this is my fourth book about Balanchine's world. I think it's my last. I say everything I think I need to say in this last book, in Serenade. So it's both a challenge and something I've just felt very driven to do.
And Toni, of all Mr. Balanchine's multifaceted masterpieces, why Serenade as the
Yes. Well, the way this project started briefly was that I was asked many years ago to write about Balanchine, like a biography. And I said, no, I wouldn't do that right away, because I knew that I love research. I could research for days, but that his life was so huge and so broad and brought in so many things. I knew that wasn't the kind of thing I would be absolutely best at. That's not my particular talent, though I'm good at, you know, a certain amount of research. So they said, well, what else? This was Yale University Press. And I sort of really kind of, I didn't come up with it in a dream, but it just occurred to me, I'll write a biography of Serenade. And it was immediately Serenade, and that never changed. I think it's because, I want to say because Serenade is Serenade. Okay, Serenade, first of all, has an enormous history. Even for one of his ballets, it has probably more history to it than any other. And in some ways significance, most notably that it was the first ballet that Balanchine made on American soil, on American dancers in 1934. on a kind of motley crew of dancers, some of them in bathing suits, maybe some hadn't been on point. You know, he didn't have a trained school by then. He had just begun the School of American Ballet. And there's many stories, apocryphal stories and true stories about the ballet. It's how its costumes came about. Balanchine originally left one movement out. He changed the order of Tchaikovsky's music. And then also my personal connection to it, which is, I think, common to many, many dancers who dance Serenade, and particularly Balanchine dancers. It happened to be the first Balanchine ballet I ever learned when I was 16 for the School of American Ballet workshop at the end of the year. Suki Shorer, and it was teaching us for the first year. And it was the first time, I think, that a Balanchine ballet was put on for the school workshop. So it's this endless, beautiful recapitulation of the first dancers. And as I write in the book, I feel this incredible legacy, and I've dedicated the book to the dancers of Serenade, past, present, and future, that we have this legacy through this ballet to the beauty and what the intricacies of the ballet, which maybe we will talk about, but also to this man who made it. I regard it as kind of like all his ballets, really, like any great artist, they are within their work, just as Shakespeare is within his work, multi-layers. And Balanchine, I feel, is so present himself in this dance. I feel like he's present in both male and female roles that he created in every one of his ballets. They're all part of his massive, like, biography, autobiography. Now, he would never say that, and he left almost no written word. I mean, he barely left us a laundry list in terms of actual writing, but within his works are worlds and worlds. And within Serenade itself, in its 32 minutes of Tchaikovsky music, there are many, many worlds of enormous beauty and mystery and drama and loss and tragedy and resurrection. It's a work of many, many layers. And the last thing I'll say about that right now is it is a particularly beloved work. Like Balanchine made many masterpieces, of which Serenade is one. But I think Serenade, and since the book's come out, I've been getting a lot of lovely people writing to me, and so many people say, Serenade's my favorite ballet. You know, people who are dancers, people who aren't dancers, they're all like, it's my favorite ballet. I love Serenade. It brings up a kind of emotional adoration by dancers and audience alike. So it was very clear to me that was the one through which I would, you know, write the story.
And as you're saying, Toni, you first learned it for this School of American Ballet workshop performance. And could you share with us some of the insight that you have into how the ballet begins? Because in your book, you spend a lot of time talking about how it begins and how Mr. Balanchine introduces certain foundational ideas about ballet technique in the opening moments of the ballet. And then maybe how that sets the course both for the ballet and then for how you've structured the start of the book.
Yes. Well, I mean, this is all so famous. And when I refer to the stories in Serenade, the first day in 1934, I think it was in March 1934, he had 17 girls in class. He didn't have an even number. And I think every day it was different. One day there was 9, one day there was 6. You know, it was kind of a bit of potluck in those days. And this day he had 17. And the very famous opening design, the girls are all on stage as the curtain rises, and he had to use 17. Now, it's, you know, it's sort of in classic ballet and in natural sense of symmetry, one would always have an even number, you know, 16, 18, 6. He had 17, and he figured out this kind of double diamond pattern where there's one central girl kind of common to each diamond, and then the girls pan out, and they're in rows, but every girl is visible. It's an exquisite, very geometric design. And he put it so every girl is visible. They're not in front of each other, as in often in petit pas ballets, for example. So that was already to me something so kind of loving. He, like, you know, everybody's mother could see them. And he put us in parallel. Now, ballet dancers spend their entire lives trying to be turned out, learning to be turned out, training to be turned out from the age of 8, which, as I'm sure many in the audience know, is when, you know, your feet and your legs, your knees and your hips, your entire leg turns out in that hip socket, which is why we start so young, because you have to train that way. So putting the girls in parallel is very unusual. It's more like modern dance or something. In fact, I write in the book, we were so trained to be turned out that when Suki at the age of 16 told us to stand in parallel, not only did we think it was strange, but it was hard to balance because we had so trained our bodies from top to toe to work turned out. And then what Balanchine does after a certain, a few phrases of the music start, and we have our hand up in this beautiful like arm up to kind of what Lincoln Kirstein called an intolerable lunar light. So it's all very mysterious. We suddenly, on a certain cue of the music, all of us are parallel and we flip our feet open. And it's absolutely, it sounds so simple, and it is. And to me, this is a statement. I mean, I'm sure he wasn't thinking this, but one could so easily say this was a statement of him saying, this is ballet. This is real life. This is natural human stance. This is the art of ballet, because then we spend our entire lives, whether leg is up or down, straight, extended, we are turned out, which gives us an entire other dimension to move in. So it's incredibly beautiful. And to this day, the audience usually gasps when the curtain rises on those girls. And when they flip out, everybody does an inhale. It's so exquisite. And so there in his first American ballet, he was declaring first position, which is, one could say, first position of all the art form. It's very profound and very simple and very beautiful.
And even as you talk about it, it's like we're catching that this idea of turnout is so much bigger than a physical outward rotation of hip sockets and opening of a chest or turning a toe to face away from the other toe. There's also like a spiritual, emotional dimension to that turnout. Could you talk a little bit about that? And then I'd also love, Peter, to hear your thoughts about those physical and philosophical dimensions of turnout.
Yes, that's an excellent question, and I completely agree with you. And it makes me think so much of how Balanchine, you know, I always think of him as a Sufi teacher, and that ballet was his method. You know, he's a man of few words, but what he really taught us was about life and about the life that's not of words and spirit, and it's hard to talk about these things. But in turning out, we are, first of all, we are going against nature, right? It's not how we were created, but because we start young, we can do it, some better than others. And of course, if you're Cirque du Soleil, some people's legs just do that naturally, but it's not the norm. But in the endeavor from age, say, 8, through 9, 10, 11, 12, through your whole career, which might go until you're 40, every day you are still perfecting that turnout and working on it. It's kind of almost, I feel like in many ways we're like nuns and monks in a convent or monastery, endlessly repeating and repeating and perfecting and finding deeper layers of how to turn out better and how to point better, how to do everything better. So it is a kind of, in this way, I consider it a spiritual practice of the best kind, because it's entirely physical. So this is why Balanchine never talked to us about spirit, or, you know, he always said, don't show me soul. He didn't like dancers who wanted to be soulful. He knew that through the physical, one might attain something higher, basically something higher than oneself, higher than one's own ego. It's and the symbolism to me of turning out, and as you said, it becomes a turnout of the whole body. To me, it's like, it's a turnout of your being, of your heart. I don't want to get too poetic, but it really does become that, because it opens up the whole body from being kind of closed and in and down to being upward, celestial, to the heavens, whatever. Ballet is vertical. We are up, we are reaching for higher, we are reaching for higher beauty than we naturally have. So it has many of these dimensions, and I'd like to hear what Peter has to say to that, about that.
Well, Toni, I'm getting so lost in your description. I'm not sure I have much to add. It's really powerful and beautiful. I mean, I think on a technical level, there's that fourth wall, and we know the audience is going to be there. And we also want to face the audience in order to give expression. But the expression of the legs won't happen in that frontal turned in position. The range is so much more limited, and the audience cannot move to the side to see some of the leg movements that we might have. But I was thinking about the opening of the heart and the opening of the mind that happens connected with the opening of the hip sockets in a way, but or the opening of a book. Since we're talking about books, it's like there's promise in that book. You want to pick it up, and then once you open it, you get to see the whole world, and it's just infinite what can be offered. But the moment in Serenade is breathtaking. And I don't even think you need to understand the principles of ballet technique to understand that. There's just something arresting about these 17 individuals. It's not a line of 17 individuals, it's 17 individuals. Each can be seen, and each of them is tapping into this generosity that turnout represents. And that's what it is. You talked about a closed body and an open body. It becomes a giving that happens when you just stand on your heels and rotate your toes outward. And it is a pretty profound expression to an audience. Silas, I'm so appreciative of you, but I don't want to undervalue that you are an accomplished professional dancer and choreographer and writer. So as you ask us these questions, please weigh in, because you lived the thing too. And I remember being your teacher and teaching you to turn out many times, and you did it quite beautifully, I'm going to add. So.
Oh, I so appreciate that. It's a treat for me to visit with both of you, having read Toni's other ballet books as I was a young student coming up, and then learning from Peter and summer training at Pacific Northwest Ballet School, and learning some of the great Balanchine choreography that you taught us. So I feel very connected to both of you in this whole discussion, and we'll chime in as seems appropriate, for sure. Toni, can you give us a flyover of the ballet's structure? Because you've really used the structure of the ballet to set the course of how you have written this book.
Yes. Well, the ballet's in 4 movements. It was originally 3 movements, and Balanchine switched the order of the last 2 movements, as I mentioned earlier. He was very sly. He adored Tchaikovsky, who's kind of the musical father of ballet. When you think of Sleeping Beauty and Swan Lake, the petit pas ballets, the great 19th century ballets, most of them were Tchaikovsky, as is Serenade, though it was not written for a ballet like those were. But Balanchine used to say that he talked to Tchaikovsky, and Tchaikovsky said it's okay that he changed the order of the music. And, we sort of believed him. I mean, Tchaikovsky died 5 or 6 years before Balanchine was born in the same city. Balanchine always liked to say we are both St. Petersburgers. But the ballet, yes, I used it. I sort of take in the book, I take the reader, the audience, through the ballet, picking moments that have a great deal of meaning for me, and also that are, due to anyone who knows the ballet, and sort of I wanted to try and take the reader inside the ballet from the stage, from, say, my position I danced it probably, I don't know, about 50 times or something over the course of 10 years, always in the same particular role. And so I tried to do that, and then hanging off of that for the structure of the book, I started to kind of off of a tree, I hung, things about the history of dance and how it began, and Marie Taglioni and Tchaikovsky and things. And then I end the book when the ballet ends. So it seemed like kind of an interesting idea that I wasn't sure if any of this was going to work. It was quite experimental, but it seems to have worked. And the end of the ballet is, of course, as iconic as the beginning, as are things in the middle. but the end of the ballet is very, very beautiful. I don't know if you want to talk about that now, or we'll get to it.
You're welcome. You can go for it now. Because you've described the opening image of the 17 ladies.
Yes. Well, one of the many things that I write about is that Serenade is full of diagonals. The opening has the diagonal arm, and then there's diagonals all over. There's a great peal of 16, 17 girls that are in a big diagonal, and they kind of ripple off stage. And then at the end, one of the three solo dancers, we call her the waltz girl, but she's also, you know, by those who write about dance, been called the heroine or the initiate or the sacrifice, or, you know, Balanchine she was just the waltz girl. That's kind of her role, because she does her main dance in the waltz section of the ballet. But at the end, she appears after a kind of a tumultuous love affair, which appears to involve several other women, that are kind of fighting over a single man. She ends on the stage floor, which was very non-19th century ballet. And you're like, is she dead? She's been down there before, and she kind of comes full circle and she's on the stage. And then six of her kind of, I think of them as handmaidens. I was one of them. We come on stage in rows, reaching up again on a diagonal to kind of another lunar light, perhaps. And she gets up and she ends up on the shoulders of two men, with a third man holding her under her long, beautiful costume. And so she's very, very, very high up, and they walk in a processional that has a very, they walk in a diagonal. She's on a diagonal, us girls are on a diagonal, and she goes up and she breaks back into a sort of there it is. See, that picture says 1,000 words. So we are all like that. Very well done. That's by Paul Kolnick, terrific photographer. And the curtain comes down while we're still on point. We couldn't wait for them to get the curtain down, because we're all backwards and on point, and it's pretty difficult position to maintain till the curtain comes down.
Well, and Toni, even as you're describing it, and this is really the joy of reading the book, is that you give us this play-by-play of the ballet with all of this illumination throughout. And in so doing, you weave together the relationship between this one ballet and its music, the historical context that's being referenced, Balanchine's biography as it relates to different vignettes in the choreography, and also the connections and allusions within Balanchine's choreography to some of the other great works of art and some of the other great ballets from the past. And could you share with us a little bit about some of your discoveries and research that you did and the connections you found between Serenade and some of its precedent in ballet history?
Sure. Well, one of them, which isn't my discovery, but is what there's a moment in the elegy section with one of the three girls is called the Dark Angel, which is she's the only one that really gets an actual mysterious name, and she's always been called that, and we all sort of not sure what it means. There's also a Balanchine Dark Angel in Orpheus, who is a man. But in the course of that, the Dark Angel leads this man in. Now, everyone's always like, who is this man? And she leads him in with her hand over his eyes. Now, of course, she leaves a little spot so he can actually see what he's doing. You know, this is theater. And he walks with his arm in front of him, and she is got her pelvis up against his back, very close. So they're walking as one with their feet together like this. And they come across this girl, the waltz girl, lying on the floor. And they stop and they kind of bend over her in a way that absolutely is taken from the great Antonia Canova's sculpture of Cupid. There it is. Yes, there is, you see the beautiful sculpture. And Balanchine's kind of, I don't even know if he would, if you know, he never mentioned it, but referencing it, or, you know, for those who know, I don't think he ever, people wrote about it, this being like Canova. He never denied it, but he didn't confirm or anything. And this was a statue he would have seen when he was in Europe after he came out of, after the Bolshevik Revolution. And it's very, very beautiful because it's the moment, and it's one of the tangents I take where Cupid is kissing Psyche, his great love, and waking her up from having taken a potion that made her like have this like an endless sleep, kind of like a Sleeping Beauty. You know, all these mythic stories have connections. So it's very, very beautiful. And I'd go off on a tangent because I became very interested in the story of Cupid and Psyche. Oh, there's many, many references like that in this ballet, which makes it so rich. And none of which, I really have to say, as a young dancer dancing it, not only did none of us really know this, we didn't need to know it, we weren't told it, because Balanchine was about the steps. He kept things very simple, and it was through that we learned whatever we learned, which is why I sort of think of him as a Sufi. He didn't say, oh, this is what the truth is. He said, you do the steps, you do good tendu, you do a better tendu. That's all you need to worry about. And as a dancer in one of his ballets, you just needed to know your role very, very well. And of course, how to, in Serenade, for example, the girls are running in and out of each other all the time. And you have to rehearse that so there's no head-on collisions. So it was very simple in that way for us. Everything I'm talking about further than that is, you know, comes from me sort of writing about it and thinking about it and what I feel now, you know, after so many years of living with this ballet.
And Toni, one of my favorite phrases in the book that you used to describe Balanchine is that he was an architect of spirit. And I'd love to hear you elaborate on that, and also to hear a little bit more about how you described working for him as being almost like being a nun in a convent. And you have a wonderful reading from the introduction of the book about this sense of devotion that you all felt to your work with Balanchine, the architect of spirit. So I'd love to maybe even hear that portion.
Well, I mean, sort of as I've been saying, yes, I do think I'm an architect in the sense that he shaped, he put bodies in space, in three-dimensional space, and then to music, always to music. So in that sense, he was an architect of bodies, but I think what the end result was, in Serenade, for example, in particular, is that it was indicative, and often it reached into realms that are not of this world, shall we say. That's individual to the person who's in the theater. Balanchine was always, not only the music was first for him, he always said he was very happy if you came to the theater and just closed your eyes and listened to the music. You know, we always had a wonderful live orchestra. And Balanchine wasn't trying to tell anybody anything, which is what maybe a great teacher does. But he showed us in all these movements to this beautiful music, you know, I mean, the number of musicians he choreographed to, I mean, Ravel's, and of course he had a very close relationship with Stravinsky, you know, Bizet and Brahms and, oh my God, and Bach, you know, the very, very great musicians and composers, that to me, it becomes, you know, an experience of spirit through the body.
And could you share with us that excerpt from the introduction to the book about your work with Mr. V?
Yes, okay, yes, I will read something. This is from the introduction. Serenade is a slant shadow on my heart. She bifurcates my being, my life. Though I have had far more life with her than without her, 3/4 to be precise. She, like countries, ships, and chandeliers, she is feminine. Lies at the near shore of Balanchine's kingdom, beckoning, alluring, yet so exacting as to not be exactly welcoming. Her countless diagonals, ever ascending, both begin and end the ballet, pointing everywhere, though always to here, here, here. Her shapes and lines and waves rise above the ocean ledge like a ghostly cathedral, suspended, the misty blue there, but not there, hardly here either. This is the shoreline of my past and of my present too. They are the same. One cannot, you see, leave the kingdom once there, despite its apparent loss. Unknowing is not possible, though the balance is precarious. There never was a time before I danced, or after either. And so we went, us fortunate few, who happened to be in the right place at the right time, with the right physical and psychic makeup. We who wanted it enough, whose yearning, even when so young, translated into grinding, relentless hard work, despite failure's daily visits. Hour upon hour, day upon day, month upon month, year upon year. The standards were indeed impossibly high. I know of no other way to achieve beauty beyond beauty. The endless competition was one of our great aids, a fact we all acknowledged in a paradoxical camaraderie of unshakable lifelong commitment to one another. Our individual ambitions subsumed in our far larger common goal, to dance Balanchine's ballets as he wanted them. It was his vision for ourselves, individually and together, to which we were devoted. Devoutly devoted. It was work that rendered any idealism, romanticism, or dreams of fluffy tutus and sparkling tiaras as decorative distractions. There was never enough, only more, always more. Through this endless physical work, through an improbable, arduous technique that enabled occasionally the submission of ego, Balanchine made us luminous, spiritual creatures for a few moments now and then. None of us have ever been more incandescent than when dancing Serenade, a ritual that purifies the sublunary. Yes, we look lovely in our elegant costumes, our faces pale with black eyes, in the low blue lighting and flickering shadows, the gold proscenium framing our proceedings. But internally is where the chemistry happens, what the audience is really seeing. Dancing Serenade, Balanchine is rushing through our bodies. But we didn't, you see, just dance it for him, his steps, his moves. We inhabited him in those steps, those moves. We him, he us. His spirit was inside our bodies, propelling every movement, every stillness. Virgins all, until we loved him and gained eternal innocence. Our love, my love for him, was not an adolescent infatuation. That intoxicating trifle was for the rare, though occasional boyfriend that soars, dims, then dies in time. This was lifelong devotion found young. What a very particular offering Balanchine provided, waking in us, in me, a wide open, unstoppable, unquestioned desire to give one's best self, one's true self, one's better than one's best self, to something deeply physical and morally beautiful. I'll stop there.
That's so beautiful. And your writing about Balanchine's poetic art is, your writing is so poetic too. It's just stunning. It's stunning. You speak so powerfully in the book about the role of women in Balanchine's artwork and his idea that ballet is a woman. And I mean, it's so interesting that you described Serenade itself, the biography of Serenade as a woman, and then the art form as a woman. Could you just talk to us about Balanchine's reverence and devotion to women, and how that manifests itself in Serenade, and then how it felt to actually be inside of that sisterhood, or that group?
Yes, well, he loved women in a way that I will never see in any man again, no matter how much a man or a woman loves a woman. To me, he kind of freed us, you know, he certainly freed me, and he's still with me always. He famously said, ballet is woman. And this is what he believed. Things maybe are changing now, but this is what he believed, and this is what his art was. And he said, and I believe in a little thing like that. And he famously talked about how men were consorts and supporters of women. Woman was the queen, he said, but he said the men aren't kings, they are like the consort. He may said a lot of little things like this. He said the man is the gardener and the woman is the flower. So they're absolutely essential, one might say, to each other, but he was truly in service to the beauty of women and women's bodies. Of course, while we have obvious human similarities, women's bodies trained in dancing, you know, men are stronger and they can jump higher and they can turn more because of their musculature, but we go on point. So we're up there on our toes, which is very delicate and beautiful and gives us a whole other way of moving. And he just loved the kind of beauty that he saw in the female form, and he loved our independence. And I think that's very, very apparent in Serenade, which is unusual to think about because he was only 30 years old when he made it. And to me, it's almost like a Balanchine manifesto, which is, he said, I'm going to devote my art to the great composers and to the theater, but for him, classical ballet was about women. And in Serenade, there's no ballet that states that more clearly. I mean, now partly that might have been a bit practical, that he just didn't have many men back in 1934, but and he added a few as the years went on. But he said this till the end of his life. And while, as Peter knows, he made some incredible choreography for men, his choreography for women is also, it certainly hasn't been superseded, and I certainly know it won't be in my lifetime, and perhaps many lifetimes. His celebration of women's independence, of their beauty, of their strength, of their sweetness, of their vulnerability. I learned all of that kind of beauty in the school of Balanchine. I'd say he was a feminist long before it was, you know, the word. 1930, right? 1930.
And you encapsulate that in a particular sentence. You said Balanchine looked at women dancers and found that we were more than enough, and then whole worlds emerged from that conviction.
Yeah.
But with that, Peter, you know, we're blessed to hear Toni's perspective from inside of Serenade and this sisterhood and this celebration of women. And I'd love to hear your impressions of the ballet from the outside and from your years of watching the ballet and what it's meant to you.
Yeah, I did have a good education coming into New York City Ballet and an education on Balanchine's work. I think Serenade was this sort of beguiling orchid to me the first time that I saw it, but I also saw that it wasn't for me. It's just so deeply feminine in a way, something about the long tulle and the light, and you know, you're met with 17 women. I think you look for yourself in what you're seeing, and you don't find that as a young male dancer. The men are not so much of a presence in Serenade. I mean, for me, thank goodness for these works, early works like Apollo, Prodigal Son. I was quite attached to this solo that Balanchine made in Le Baiser de la Fée for Helgi Thomasson later in life. But there are these really sort of meaty roles for men, but I couldn't agree with Toni more that there was reverence and a prize of all things women. And you could feel that in Serenade for sure. Serenade to me, it's just one of those works. I think of when I look at maybe like a Rothko or a Cezanne. I like them at first. I just really like them. They're just powerful. I walk by it in a gallery as a first-time gallery viewer, and I'm taken. I can go back time and time again and see more in a Rothko and more in a Cezanne. And with Serenade, I have seen that ballet, I don't know, at least 150 times. And I still see things that I feel open up my mind, things that I didn't appreciate or see the first time. Even as Toni said, now that first pose, I'm not sure I ever realized that everyone had their own sight line to their mother, but you know, that was a conscious decision. It's sort of this array, like a beautiful grove in a way, that you see, but the linear quality of that grove is crucial, and there are moments that just deepen the more I view it. And that is the sign of a great work of art. If you see it once, you see it twice, you say, oh, I've seen that. It probably doesn't have the resonance that it needs to have. And Serenade, I will never tire of that work. And I think actually I grow to appreciate it even more over time than I did. And I'm not looking for where my part is in Serenade anymore, because it's not going to happen. But my admiration and appreciation for the construction and the bravery and the rejection. I mean, you have 17 women at that time. Anybody would put them in a line, a non-individual line that would create a formation. And Balanchine said, no, I'm going to do something different here. I'll go on just a bit. We talked about this in our conversation before this interview. I landed in the New York City Ballet at the strangest of times, because I really entered as a member of the company, honestly, on the day that Balanchine died. And there was I was so remorseful that I wasn't going to really work with Balanchine aside from the children's parts. But I do feel that Balanchine sort of spoke and revealed philosophies through the ballets. And Silas, you're more removed from that. But I remember learning Le Baiser de la Fée my first year in the company and understanding this is what Balanchine heard in the music here. This was the intention. That's where the accent was. This is so logical to my body because of the training that I had at the School of American Ballet. And he was never in the room coaching me, but there was almost this omnipresent ghost presence that spoke through the works. And that is the articulate legacy that I'm glad we have Toni to lead us into that with words. Balanchine didn't offer the words, but he did offer the works.
And before, I mean, we're closing in on the end of our time together, and I just wanted to finish with asking both you, Peter, and Toni, why in light of all of this is Balanchine important, and what do his life and his work have to teach us, dancers and non-dancers, today?
Why is he important? Well, it's apparent from our conversation why he's important to me. I mean, I can't imagine what my life would be or who I would be in any way if he hadn't come into my life when I was so young. He was truly, truly my teacher in every way, and still is, always will be. Always will be. And I think that's true for everyone who danced for him. We all still talk about him like that. He's important in the way that truly, truly great artists are important. As Peter was saying so eloquently, there are layers and layers and layers, and you can go back over and over like you can with a great book and see more each time. And Balanchine expanded this particular very fragile, ethereal art form into so many other realms in terms of music and movement. You know, he's famously stripped down the costumes. He took out all the pantomime. He streamlined things for the speed of the 20th and 21st century. that he changed this particular art form, and I think he's also became, for many, many people in his audience to this day, a teacher of very beautiful things that are not of this world, to my mind.
Yeah, I thought that was beautifully put. I'm not sure I have anything to add. It is, Serenade is an eternal work, and I'm excited we programmed it next year for our students in our school to perform as the culmination of our 50th anniversary season. And as with your dedication in the book, Toni, Serenade is going to continue to give, and it's going to give to audiences, but in particular, it will give to dancers. And I love that it was originally made on students, and it's as much at home with students today as it is with accomplished professionals. But and I'll just say as my final word, I love this book. It just was like a deep dive into things that were very personal, but I think even if you haven't lived in that world, it really resonates. So bravo, Toni, thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
We're at time now, but Holly, if you have anything you want to say, we turn it to you.
I just want to thank you all so very much for being here. Toni, that was just so eloquent and beautiful. What a lovely, lovely tribute to both a man and a performance. And thank you so much. And thank you, Peter, and thank you, Silas, as well. We're just so very pleased for this evening. We wish we could have done it in person.
Next time.
Next time, absolutely. Paperback release.
There you go.
Yes, it would be about this time next year, I think.
Great.
Yes, maybe in time for when Pacific Northwest puts it on, Peter.
Lovely.
Perfect.
Lovely. What a
Indeed.
wonderful thing.
Great, indeed. Yes, thank you all so much. This was so lovely. I feel so close to Silas and Peter, all through our through line of Balanchine. This is really what holds us all together as an extended family through years and decades.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you. Thank you again.
Good night.
Good night.